wonderful to be in Vienna, and we've had such a wonderful welcome, and looking forward to exploring a bit more later on. I've got two technical helpers today, Annabel and Griff. So while I just talk a bit about how I got into the TV industry, I think they're just going to show some photos of past programmes I've worked on. So if there's anything you want to ask about later on, then we can always refer back to these later. I've been in television now for about 26 years. I know I don't look old enough. I started off at the BBC where I was staff for 10 years, which was a brilliant start to the career because you work alongside a lot of other makeup designers who all have different techniques and ways of working. Lots of different programmes, from live sports coverage to news, current affairs and comedy, drama, and then obviously lots of contemporary or period drama as well. So you get to use lots of different techniques and wigs, special effects and so on. So that was a great start for me. After working in the BBC, I then became freelance, which basically means you have to go and hunt down the jobs, or they come looking for you. Well, that's a picture from Doctor Who there, obviously with a wig and beard and moustache to change the appearance of Simon Cowell. Not Cowell. So yes, when I became freelance, a friend of mine was working on the film Alexander in Morocco, and she called up and said, could you come and help us, we need more people. So I flew off to Morocco for 3 weeks, which was a wonderful experience, and met some people there, and one of them then became the makeup designer on series 1 of Doctor Who with Christopher Eccleston. So that was my start, I suppose, in sci-fi drama. And then that production team then went on to do Torchwood, Sarah Jane Adventures, and then on to Sherlock. So that's how they knew me and how I became involved in sci-fi drama. So in 2010 we did the Sherlock pilot. My interview was quite a tricky one, I guess. There was 4 very powerful women in the room interviewing me, and I was quite nervous. But in my portfolio there was a sort of skin condition that I had to research for another job. No, it's not. Oh yeah, there it is, on the cheek. And the Koki, the director, had seen this on a friend of hers and couldn't believe how realistic it was. So I think she realised then that, you know, I pay attention to detail, research things properly and try and make things look as realistic as they can be, using different makeup techniques. So once you are sort of asked to do a job, you then get sent the scripts. You meet with directors and producers to discuss the various characters involved in the story. And the process of design, I suppose, begins then. And you look at how you can change someone's appearance. And of course, with Sherlock, when they cast Benedict, the notes that I had from Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat is that they wanted him to look like a sort of a Byron-esque sort of poet character that had a lot of mystery about him. But also they wanted his skin complexion to be quite pale, as if he was a man of the night that didn't kind of move around much during the day, but his mysteries and problem solving all happened at night. So there's a picture of them from the pilot. They look quite young there, don't they? Benedict's hair was a bit too short to really have that sort of tousled curl that he's had later in the series, but you know, it was a starting point. And then when we came to do series 1, unfortunately for me, in between, Benedict had gone off to play Van Gogh. So his hair had been bleached. So we had to start the process all over again. And that was quite tricky. He wanted to go to his hairdresser in London, so I went there to meet him. and they coloured his hair. And we then went back to Wales to start shooting a couple of days later. And then, unfortunately, his hair turned green. So when I saw him in the rehearsal room, practicing his lines, and he was stood under a fluorescent light, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was green. So there was an SOS call to a hairdresser friend of mine who suggested what colours to use and how we could dye it back. So that happened, I think, the day before we actually started shooting. So it's always good to have a good network of talented friends as well that you can call on. And Watson, I suppose, was governed by the fact that he was ex-military, so hair length had to be quite short. He was very much in sort of control, so, you know, to keep him neat and tidy, I think that was the brief for Watson. So that's how the sort of design process started with them. And then, I guess, from the main cast, obviously we've got Mrs. Henson as well, and she was warm, friendly character, someone who looked after them, that you would always approach if you needed help, but also a bit of a wicked dark side, I think, to Mrs. Henson as well. I think she's got lots of secrets. So, again, not giving too much away, but, you know, that helped in the sort of design for her, that she wasn't a sort of dodgy old woman. She'd had adventures of her own in her life, and, you know, was still very much finger on the button. And what's always interesting with each story, of course, is that you get the victim. And in series 1, we had the lady in pink. Now, I love the fact that the script is so detailed in, especially what Sherlock sees that nobody else does, that governs a lot in the design process with the victims and the attention to detail. So, as you can see with the nails, because they shoot quite closely on a macro lens, so any tiny detail will become huge on a 46-inch screen at home. So you do have to work very carefully to make it look as real as possible. So the nails were broken on the end where she'd been clawing into the wood on the floor. I'd put little splinters of wood underneath the nail in case they were seen. So, you know, those are the things that I really enjoy, picking up on all that detail and making it look as real as possible. Oh yeah, and the tattoo, was that for? Yeah, that was another design, yeah, for Black Anchor. But they were sort of other bits of evidence, but I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So when we get to Blind Banker, there was quite a big cast for that one because we had the whole Chinese circus and again the villains as well as the victims. So we talk through with costume as well, how they're going to dress them. We work alongside costume very closely and design department so that we can bring the whole look together. And of course there's the geisha sort of makeup for the circus, but then she also becomes the villain. So the makeup as the villain was kind of quite hard and structured. And with the Blind Banker, talking about working with the art department, of course there was the jade hairpin, which we had to incorporate into Olivia's character in the offices. So again, we designed a hairstyle that would work along with placing in the hairpin. It was very subtle at the beginning, wasn't it? And that's where it's nice to work with the other departments as well. And then we go on to, I'm sort of talking in episode order really, just to give me a structure, but if you want to come back and ask questions afterwards about any specific characters, then we can do that at the end. The Great Game is where we meet Moriarty, and initially we see him as a friend of Molly's in the lab, and again Sherlock's sort of view of him, he sees all those little hidden things that we don't, but because this scripted, it helps me in how that character looks initially. I think there was a picture there, I don't know how it was before, but it's very subtle changes. he was very soft and slightly effeminate, I suppose, when as Mary's friend, as Sherlock deduced. And then later on, obviously, he becomes a much harder character. And it might not be obvious, but there's sort of slight changes, hardening of the hairline, a fine line in his eyes to accentuate, you know, that nasty, vicious stare that he has. And again, we have some victims, as always. And Connie Price was quite a challenge as the dead body. I don't know if you're a bit squeamish, but when a body's been lying for some time, you get this sort of blood lividity, it's called, where this, again, you have to research quite specifically because, you know, you do get people watching the show that actually know what happens for real. And I often call up the guys at this particular mortuary and they help me out with things. It's quite squeamish. But I think it's important that you get it right. So there's poor Connie, Di Botcher, who's an actress that I work quite a lot with. And on this particular day, we were filming in the mortuary and there was a snowstorm happening outside. And it was getting worse and worse, and the roads were going to be closed. We were 25 miles out of Cardiff, and all the cast and crew had to get back. And we kept warning them, it's getting quite bad. So the crew started packing up all their gear, and the cameras were being taken out, and the sound equipment was being taken out, and poor Di was still lying there on the slab. And because she knew me quite well, she sort of called me over and she said, "Claire, do you think I better put some clothes on?" So it was a bit of a scramble to get this scene finished, to be honest, and then we were whisked away, and I think I will have to do a couple of trips in the Jeep to save some of the crew, didn't you, that day? So that was all quite interesting. And then the other villain of this episode was the Golem. We were told how to pronounce it. And he was a great guy. He was, I think, about 7'6". In real life, I mean, you can see there, he was absolutely enormous, and you know, there was no way I could do makeup checks without him sitting down. And when he arrived in Cardiff, Mark Gatiss had scripted that this character was bald and very skeletal sort of features, and also needle-like sharp teeth. And this guy was such a lovely man, he just had normal teeth. So I then had to take him to a dentist friend of mine who started making a lot of these sort of character teeth now for TV. So I had to take him to the dentist to have a mould taken of his own teeth. And then this guy actually sculpts the teeth to go on top of his own. And they were horrific. They were brown and yellow and pointy. And I think they work to treat. It does make him look quite ferocious. But he had difficulty getting in and out of the chair, as he did in the makeup truck. So, and actually this leads on to that whole sequence involved 2 stuntmen as well as Martin and Benedict. I think for lots of reasons they bring stuntmen in, obviously because they don't want their main characters injured in any way. And because they can be quite physical and dangerous. For these 3, well, actually we had a Golem double as well. Golem double. Now they never turn up looking like the actor, so quite often that's a big transformation as well. The tallest stuntman they could get was only 6'3", I think, with a full head of hair. In fact, he had more curly hair than Sherlock does. And he had to be bald capped. And Benedict's double turned out completely bald, without a hair on his head. So obviously then the Sherlock double had to be wigged, the Golem double had to have a bald cap, and the Watson double had to be wigged. So I do my best to make it look as realistic as possible, because when it comes to the final edit, they want to be able to use every single shot they can to make the sequence flow and to keep the energy, and so I do try my best to make them look as good and realistic as they can. Oh yeah. But in fact, John, who played the golem, got a bit too enthusiastic when the Sherlock double jumped on his back and he pulled him off by his wig, which obviously ended up in his hand. So they did have to stop shooting at that point in where he applied the wig, and he was told not to be quite so ferocious with his double. Yeah, that does lead on to quite a good story when Torchwood, the final series that was being shot in America, came back over to Wales for a 2-week shoot. The American crew came with them, and we had a fantastic scene where 4 or 5 of the characters were in an armoured jeep, tearing along the beach right at the sea edge, being chased by 2 helicopters, and they had guns and they were firing at each other. Now obviously they don't want to endanger all the cast at that point, so again, that's where the stunt doubles come in. And they were all wigged and made up and to look as much like the cast as they possibly could. The following day, the American executive producer phoned Judy Gardner, our producer in Wales, and she had a right telling off for endangering all of the cast. But how dare she put them in such grave danger in a fast-moving vehicle so close to the water's edge. So she was very thrilled when she could turn around and say, well, actually, they were stunt doubles. So if the executive producer couldn't tell the difference, then I think I did a good job. So, you know, that's something I really enjoy doing, and when you can fool them. And in fact, when we shot that scene, I think Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat went up to the 2 doubles to talk about script changes. So even they were fooled. So I think that's a sort of brief outline of Series 1 and the characters that we met there. I'll move on to Series 3 because unfortunately I wasn't available to shoot Series 2, which I obviously regret. But they asked me back, so I think they liked having me around. The Empty Hearse, because of the restaging of that famous fall, we had to do a lot of research there because all of the supporting cast were asked back. Now I think 2 years had gone by, well we all know how long but we had to wait. And obviously people go off and get their hair coloured and cut, so it was painstaking. I had to go through all the footage and try and get screen grabs of every single supporting person that was around the body on the floor, the medical staff that attended, and basically match exactly how they looked. So, you know, again, it's painstaking, but it's well worth it when you see it cut together and you can't see where any of the changes happen. No, it was the pre-title sequence where we had Sherlock in his long wig and his injuries from his torture. So of course we had to have him bare-chested, and we had to put sort of whip marks, grazes, blood, sweat, tears, even his toenails were dirtied. Yeah, so that was quite fun for the makeup department. We enjoyed that. And there was one thing that Mark Gatiss was quite firm about, that we had to believe that the torturer was Serbian. So we had a working girl with us at the time, and it was her job then to go off and research Serbian prison tattoos. So she spent a day in the library, she came back, she was absolutely brilliant, which is, again, research is a big part of our job. And she came back with various photographs and their meanings. And that then is a discussion we have with the director, and he can choose which ones he wants. So that whole sequence really, although it was quite quick, took a lot of work and preparation from the department.